Former Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta sat down with 60 Minutes to talk about ISIS, Iraq, and Syria. And this is a little sneak peek preview they're giving us of the discussion they had. And I'll tell you beforehand, everything about this clip pisses me off. The things they say are wildly misleading and totally misinformed. So let's listen, then I'll break it down.
ISIS seized a third of Iraq that had been secured by the United States after 10 years of sacrifice. Tonight, in an interview for 60 Minutes, former Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta says that ISIS flourished because the U.S. got involved in Syria too late and left Iraq too soon. Back when you watched the Stars and Stripes being lowered for the last time in Baghdad, were you confident in that moment that pulling out was the right thing to do?
No, I wasn't. I really thought that it was important for us to maintain a presence in Iraq.
But the elected Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki didn't want the U.S. force. As Iraq moved on its own, civil war broke out in Syria. The U.S. stayed largely on the sidelines, but Panetta says the national security team urged the president to do more.
The real key was, how can we develop a leadership group among the opposition that would be able to take control? And my view was, to have leverage to do that, we would have to provide the weapons and the training in order for them to really be willing to work with us in that effort.
But with virtually his entire national security team unanimous on this, that's not the decision the president made.
I think the president's concern, and I understand it, was that he had a fear that if we started providing weapons, we wouldn't know where those weapons would wind up. My view was, you have to begin somewhere.
Do you understand what he just said at the end there? Think about what he just said at the end there. The president didn't want to give weapons to the Syrian rebels, but he says, well, I was in favor of doing it because you have to start somewhere. Wait, what? That's your standard for handing out machine guns and anti-aircraft missiles. Well, we have to start somewhere. Why? What do you mean, start somewhere? You act like giving out weapons is a necessity, like it's humanitarian aid from the UN, like you're giving out packages of Tang. These are weapons we're talking about here. You're just like, yeah, no, just give them out so that people can fight in a revolution and topple a government and destabilize a region of the world even further. Why are you acting like that's a necessity? What the fuck business is it of ours? No, we never learn our lessons. The American government on this issue of intervention and arming different people for different reasons, we never learn our lessons from history. It's embarrassing. Over the weekend, I watched a documentary on the Taliban, and they brought up a point that, honestly, I didn't know. I always come out here and say, well, dumbass Ronald Reagan armed the Mujahideen to fight the Soviet Unions when they were fighting a war in Afghanistan. It wasn't just Ronald Reagan. You know who else it was? Jimmy Carter. Mr. Oh, yes, anti-war. He's much more in favor of peace and not getting involved places. Anyway, can you please send those machine guns to those jihadis? We'd really appreciate that. So Jimmy Carter, the Democrat, and Ronald Reagan, the Republican, they don't agree on anything except giving weapons to Taliban fighters. That's how the Taliban was created. They didn't have any fucking weapons. They had nothing. They were a bunch of goat herders until the U.S. government gave them a tremendous amount of weapons to fight the Soviet Union. Why? Because the U.S. government, in our infinite paranoia, we were afraid that the Soviet Union, they were moving in on Afghanistan to take Afghanistan and then have more oil production in that region. So we had to go there and defend the oil so we could steal it for ourselves and not let the Soviet Union steal it for themselves. And then meanwhile, the declassified documents after the fact showed that both the U.S. and Russia, they both assume the worst of the other party. So it's not like Russia was actually trying to steal Afghanistan and trying to take oil, but we assume they were, okay? So the answer to these idiots is always the same thing. More war, more arming, and then fuck it, it'll work out in the long run. But it never works out in the long run. I mean, think about it. We just gave weapons to Egypt. What did Egypt do with those weapons? Gun down peaceful protesters in the street. We just gave weapons to Israel, $1 billion in aid to Israel every year. What do? A massive incursion into Gaza, over 2,000 people dead, 80% civilians. Then the Mujahideen under Reagan and Carter, where we created the Taliban and al-qaeda. We created them. They wouldn't have had any power if they never got our weapons. And now what's this genius want to do? Give weapons to the FSA, the Free Syrian Army, the Sunnis, okay, fighting the Shiite Alawite government, who is Assad, right? Now, I'm not saying Assad's a good guy, but if Assad falls, who fills the vacuum? Well, who's the strongest group fighting in that region? ISIS! ISIS, you dipshits! And then, by the way, in 2013, President Obama approved weapons to go from Saudi Arabia, our ally, to the FSA, the Free Syrian Army, to fight against Assad. You know who ended up getting those weapons? ISIS. Then also there were reports. Now, John Kerry says, oh, this is not true. This is outrageous. And Obama says, oh, this is not true. This is outrageous. But as soon as we announced to the FSA, hey, we're going to give you some weapons, when Obama gave the speech about Syria, they made a peace deal with ISIS. They made a truce with ISIS. Now, again, the government says that's not true. I don't believe them for a second. Why? What is the whole purpose of the FSA existing? They act like the FSA got together specifically to fight ISIS. No, they didn't. They got together to try to topple Assad. So now we say naively, well, we'll just give them weapons, and then they'll use those weapons exactly how we want them to use those weapons. No, they're not. They're going to use it in the way that they said they were going to fucking use it in the first place, against Assad and not against ISIS. How do you not know these things? We always arm people. They use the weapons for the thing we don't want them to use it for, and then we blame them as if it's their problem and as if it's their fault. No, it's our fault. It's our fault. How about we don't give them weapons? How about that radical idea? I don't understand for the life of me how these idiots... This is the former defense secretary. You don't understand this? You don't get this? And arrogantly, he's like, we should have armed them sooner. Great, so ISIS could get more weapons sooner? Literally every single weapon in ISIS' hands is from the United States. How do I know that? Because a lot of the weapons they got were left behind from George W. Bush's Iraq war. They just waltzed in and said, we'll take those Humvees and those anti-aircraft missiles. Thank you, America, for leaving them behind. And the other weapons they got were from Saudi Arabia, which we fucking approved. Every time we do this, we fuck up an area of the world. Can we stop? Can we stop? And the final thing I'll say about this, his argument, as Scott Pelley laid out, what Leon Panetta said, he's like, hey guys, I think we went into Syria too late and we left Iraq too soon. This is now standard establishment Washington wisdom 101. Everybody's saying this. The Democrats and the Republicans are all saying, yeah, you know, Iraq was doing just peachy when we were there in like 2007 and 2008. Are you fucking kidding me? No. That's not the problem. The problem is we went in there in the first place, not that we left too soon.